DK Metcalf wants out of Seattle, and we think the Chargers and Packers might be the best fit. We'll explain on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the data queen, Michelle Majuk. On today's episode, we'll talk about some offensive line help the Bears got through some trades. We'll talk about Maxx Crosby's extension and why he wants Aaron Rodgers next. But we'll start with the big news out of Seattle. DK Metcalf wants out of the Seahawks organization. We'll talk about some best fits for DK Metcalf. Before we get into it, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. It's a crazy time of year in the NFL. We're bringing you all of the breaking news. You got the morning edition here with me. You got the afternoon edition with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. Stay up to date on all of the biggest NFL news during free agency and the draft with Locked On NFL. But with that being said, Michelle, when you saw the DK Metcalf trade request, what was your first thought?
I mean, I understand it, right? Because he has to keep the Seahawks keep changing offensive coordinators, so he has to keep learning a new scheme. It doesn't seem like he and Geno Smith have the best connection. Like his numbers are okay, but he's not being utilized as that top dog anymore with Geno Smith in this offense. And DK probably wants a new contract, and it doesn't seem like the Seahawks are willing to give that to him. So with all of those things together, it makes perfect sense that he's requesting a trade. Weird timing with them just releasing Tyler Lockett, and then they'd only have Jackson Smith the Jigba. But I do think the Seahawks should think about this, and also I understand why DK Metcalf is requesting it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. You're knocking on some key themes there, and we'll hear what my guy Corbin Smith, who, let's give some credit to Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks, had this report that DK Metcalf was involved in trade conversations, took some heat when it was uncertain, but Corbin Smith, great work there with Locked On Seahawks, and we'll hear what he had to say about the reasoning.
And this was something that I had the pleasure of breaking this morning, reaching out with multiple sources. The Green Bay Packers, along with two other teams, have had discussions with John Schneider about the availability of DK Metcalf. And those that have been following the reports, Nick, I know you and I have talked about this as well. This was my big disclaimer at the beginning of all this. I do not think that the Seahawks are actively, shopping DK Metcalf. That was not at all what I posted this morning. However, I do think that there are a couple teams that have at least opened John Schneider's ears to the possibility of maybe moving on from Metcalf. And look, this is what teams do this time of year with players who are heading into the final year of their contract, that they may have some potential concerns about whether they want to pay the price to extend them or if they're going to be able to reach an agreement. And the Seahawks certainly don't want to be in a position where this time next year, they're either having to use a super expensive franchise tag on DK Metcalf or they lose him for nothing.
Something that I talked about recently on the show when we talked about this initial trade buzz here is that the Seahawks, I guess in my opinion, you don't need more than one high-priced receiver. And with how good Jackson Smith and Jigba was last year, and like you mentioned, where the contract situation is for DK Metcalf, he's going to be 28 years old next year. And look, that doesn't sound old, and I get it, but it will be his 7th season in the NFL this year. So unless you think that DK Metcalf is going to play 15 seasons in the NFL, he's probably starting the back half of his career. And when I don't want to say that the Seahawks are super far away, but they're far enough away from being a Super Bowl contender. And they're probably not getting there with Geno Smith, which means they need to start thinking about the next quarterback that could potentially make them a contender. And by the time that DK Metcalf is involved with all that, the money, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think Jackson Smith and Jigba's emergence and where the Seahawks are as a team are the two biggest factors. But you mentioned the contract. Who is a team that you think. Corbin mentioned the Packers, and I like the Packers as an idea, but I know you have an idea that you really like that's a team that would pay and does need him.
Yeah, I would love him to go to the Chargers. I think he'd be such a good fit there, that deep threat for Justin Herbert. And he'd be a perfect complement to Lad McConkey, who's that possession receiver, right? And then DK Metcalf could do what he does best and just like moss people, right? And get those deep and long receptions. And I do think he's a top tier talent in this league. I think he's been stuck in an offense that I said continually changes each year. Geno Smith is a fine passer, but it's not like he's going to upgrade your game at all for a wide receiver. And then like last year, he was actually killing it. I kind of forgot the beginning of the year. I mean, in the beginning for his knee injury, 129 yards, 104, 99, like all of these games, all before week 7, hurts his knee and then doesn't do much else the rest of the year. I still think he has plenty in him. I think he could be great. And I think if he goes to he would be well worth the trade compensation and paying him.
Yeah, and I think at his age, while he is starting the back end of the career and the timeline of that doesn't make sense for where Seattle's at, he's still a very good player. Top 15 wide receiver in the NFL, healthy, I would say pretty close to that range. So I think he would make sense for a team. The Chargers are a great fit because I like having my wide receiver group as a basketball team. So if you have DK Metcalf, who is your power forward, who's athletic, can go jump over people and make these big plays and be a red zone weapon as well. And then you have your shooting guard running off screens and getting all the little dirty buckets like you have with Lad McConkey. That makes sense. But I do like the Packers. As I mentioned, I think where they're at as a team, he would make a lot of sense as a dominant number one option for them with kind of the basket or with kind of the solid wide receiver group that they have. It's all mid-tier wide receivers, and he would basically be like a super soldier version of Christian Watson at this point since they can't really rely on him. So that makes sense to me. But another team that obviously makes sense is the Buffalo Bills. If they think, hey, we didn't want to do the star wide receiver route with Stephon Diggs because of his age. Well, DK Metcalf still in like the prime middle third of his career right now. He does fit our timeline more. Maybe they'd be willing to pay that. So Buffalo's another team that I'd like to throw in there.
Yeah, I mean, Buffalo is pretty much a team that we want any and all wide receivers to go to, right?
Yes,
just for our excitement. I also think the Texans could be another one with the news about Tank Dell finally undergoing ACL surgery today. I mean, that's been a long time since the season. It's very likely he misses the full 2025 season. Stephon Diggs is a free agent. So then it's just Nico Collins, who is great. And maybe Nico Collins and DK Metcalf are two similar players for this to make sense. But I do think the Texans need to add wide receiver. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're calling up the Seahawks either.
And it would just be incredible to have Nico Collins and DK Metcalf, these two big physical imposing players on the outsides. And then you have Tank Dell, once he's healthy, on the inside. Even a guy like John Mechie, who's probably needing to step up right now for the Texans. Like that's a good trio right there. I do want to mention Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks, who we heard from earlier. He also mentioned that the Seahawks likely would like to get a wide receiver back. And that's why a team like the Chargers with maybe a Quentin Johnston, or maybe the Packers with a Romeo Doubs, or, you think about Buffalo. Would they do Keon Coleman, who was just a first-round pick? I don't know. That would have to take down the draft pick compensation, but that could make some sense for Seattle as well. I think one other team that obviously does make sense is the Baltimore Ravens. They have a lot of guys who aren't big, physical, imposing threats, so maybe that would make sense. Is there anybody else out there who you think could throw their hat in the ring?
I'm sure a lot of teams are going to want him, right? I mean, the Patriots need a wide receiver one.
Patriots are a big one. He wants to go to a contender, though, so it's hard for me to sell the Patriots, but the Patriots obviously have a desperate need, too.
The Cowboys, if they wanted to get crazy and actually do anything with their team this offseason, unlike last year, they could really use another wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb and his skill set with DK Metcalf would be incredible. And also I think DK has the connection with Brian Schottenheimer too from the Seahawks.
Yes.
So
I actually love that. They just cleared out $50 million of cap space too, restructuring Dak and CeeDee Lamb. So that would be incredible. But so many great possibilities. It's all going to play out over the next few weeks. But we got a huge monster contract signed on Wednesday. Maxx Crosby with the Raiders. He's staying put. But what comes next? Maxx Crosby had something to say about it. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Chewy. Excuse me. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything that you need to keep your pet happy. Today's episode is brought to you by Chewy. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet health care, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable with over 100,000 products from all your favorite brands. Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food to treats to toys to beds to grooming. And it's not just dogs and cats. They have supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets too. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth visits, and even in-person vet clinics. They have auto ship, which is a game changer for me personally. You can set it up to automatically deliver food, treats, or anything. Like my dog loves the little lamb chop toys, his little lammies, and I just keep them on rotation with auto ship from Chewy. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Right now, you could save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. All right, Michelle, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the DK Metcalf news. You mentioned Tyler Lockett getting released too. So a total changing of the guard there in Seattle. Some teams that make sense for DK Metcalf, but the only team that makes sense for Maxx Crosby is the Las Vegas Raiders. And he re-upped in a major way, 3 years, $105 million or 106.5. I think is really the real total. $91 million guaranteed. It is the highest contract in NFL history for a non-quarterback, the highest paid edge rusher in NFL history as well. I mean, we've heard so many rumors about Maxx Crosby and potentially being traded. Clearly, he wanted to stay in Vegas, and they put their money where their mouth is and got it done.
Yeah, I have been on this, I don't know what to call it, a kick, I guess, of should teams be paying edge rushers? And I don't want to just use this super small sample size to ruin.
Right.
Like, edge rushers are obviously very important in getting the sacks and the quarterback pressures. But I will say, I mean, the teams that are paying all of these top guys, and Nick Bosa and Josh Allen with the Jags, and Brian Burns with the Giants, TJ Watt with the Steelers, Myles Garrett with the Browns. I mean, all of those teams were not good last year, right? And TJ Watt and Myles Garrett, two of the best edge rushers in the league since 2017. I mean, that is now a long time in the league, 8 years, 8 years ago that they got drafted, basically. They have a combined one playoff win between the two of them. And you're talking about the two very best edge rushers in the league. And Maxx Crosby is up there with them, but it just has not proven to do anything if you pay these guys. And I just not sure if it's worth it at this. What are the Raiders doing is really my thought process. I get it. Maxx Crosby is amazing and he deserves it. It's just, I think the Raiders had a perfect opportunity here to trade a key piece that could have got them a ton of draft picks to kind of try to revamp their team, because they're not going anywhere with how their offense is right now.
And listen, I think that's completely fair, but I think the real question that you're pointing out is, should you pay anyone if you don't have a good quarterback? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a good quarterback, you're not going to win very many games. Even the Eagles, who had the best roster of all time, I'm not trying to hate on Jalen Hurts, who deserved his MVP, but you still got to have a certain level of quarterback play, even if your roster is absolutely tremendous. So I guess the question really is paying attention to the timeline of a team and whether it's smart to pay. We talk about Maxx Crosby and, should the Raiders pay him? They don't have a quarterback, but that leads me into the quarterback conversation for the Las Vegas Raiders. And Maxx Crosby, who just got paid, well, he has a suggestion, and we'll throw it to your boy Q from Locked On Raiders to give us the details.
I found it pretty interesting that he, was intrigued by Aaron Rodgers and thinks he's going to have a real big bounce-back season. I will say this, it's his second year removed from a torn Achilles, and I know as a guy that tore both my ACLs in one in each knee, I've always knew that you're always better the second year removed from a pretty bad injury. And now, look, I was not an athlete like these guys, so they can bounce back faster than, any of us normal folk would. But at the same time, I do believe 2 years removed from that torn Achilles, he'll be a lot better than what we saw from him last year. I'm not a big believer in what Aaron Rodgers can bring to the table. I just don't think that he's right for the Raiders locker room. I don't know if he's going to do a whole lot to help get them to the next level. But the one thing we do know is that he would be the best quarterback as far as just pure ability, right? I mean, we saw all the different stuff that he had cooking with, Pat McAfee and, not going to mandatory mini camps because of a trip to Egypt and all those shenanigans. But if anybody could probably calm him down, and I don't even want to say calm him down, it's not like he's running around like a wild child, but if anyone could just kind of say, hey, man, Aaron, this is what we're going to do here, this is the plan, it would probably be Tom Brady and Pete Carroll, right? So I don't think that Aaron Rodgers is out of the question. He's not my favorite, but that doesn't mean anything, and he very well could end up with the silver and black, and clearly Maxx Crosby would be okay with that.
So I know that you're of the opinion that Rodgers should just fade into oblivion and retire. I understand that. But if he were to play next year, the Raiders do seem like a logical fit. They don't have a good answer at quarterback. They're probably too far back to get one of the top two quarterbacks. Would they really want to pay a Sam Darnold? It seems like he doesn't have as many suitors as it may seem like. I think that Rodgers does make sense, and maybe Davante Adams, you mend that fence. That's the real question for me, is Rodgers and Adams seem like they want to play together, and would Adams go back to the Raiders after the ending that they had last year?
I feel like Adams' whole issue is the quarterbacks, right? With the Raiders and them losing. So I do think he'd be willing to go back, and there's no new coaching staff and all of that as well. So this does make sense as a landing spot because they hired Pete Carroll, because they signed Maxx Crosby. Obviously, this does not seem like a team that's looking to rebuild, right? They're looking to win now. And Aaron Rodgers is the best option out there for them at this moment if that's what they want to do. And if they can add Davante Adams, and then you have Jacoby Myers, and then you have Brock Bowers, hopefully they can add a running game as well in there. They would be an interesting team. Do I think Aaron Rodgers still has enough in him to make a deep playoff run? No, but at least they would be competitive next year.
Yeah, and I think that's really what that organization is hoping for right now. You bring in a guy like Pete Carroll, you're not trying to do a long-term build here. You're trying to turn the culture around quickly and win games quickly. And I don't think that they have a real path to doing that outside of maybe Aaron Rodgers. Now, we did hear, not hear, but see, I guess, read Ian Rappaport in a tweet about Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams mentioned that they would prefer to be on the West Coast. Now, the Raiders is the first team that actually made sense, because the Chargers aren't doing that. They're not getting rid of Justin Herbert. And the Los Angeles Rams just brought back Matthew Stafford. And I guess maybe you could call it Seattle on the West Coast. Maybe they would cut Geno Smith. I don't see that as in the nature of West Coast. Vegas is about as close as I get. It's not on the coast, but it's West, But a team that you could at least forge a path to is the San Francisco 49ers. Michelle, as a pseudo 49ers representative, as I like to say, do you think there's any chance that we could see Brock Purdy traded instead of paid, and then Rodgers and Adams in San Francisco?
It would be the stupidest decision that the 49ers have ever made in there. It would be even worse than the Trey Lance trade up, because
I was going to bring that up. I was going to say, that was bad.
You'd be trading a 25-year-old who has led all quarterbacks in passing yards per attempt and passer rating since becoming a starter in 2022, who has taken your team to a Super Bowl, taken them to another NFC championship on top of that, and got injured during it. So you don't even know. He could have gone to 2 Super Bowls, right? And you're doing that all for maybe 1 year with Aaron Rodgers. Like, you get, what are you going to get? 1 year, 43-year-old Aaron Rodgers? That makes no sense whatsoever. I would not get that move. It would be so silly. I would actually really like the 49ers to go get Davante Adams, but not Aaron Rodgers. I wish Adams wasn't like all gung-ho.
Where are your best spots for him if he doesn't follow Aaron Rodgers?
See, there's so many good spots for Adams. There's just not a lot of good spots for both of those two together. But for Adams, I mean, you can point out so many different teams. I already brought up the Texans, but Chargers, the Steelers, the Broncos, the Ravens, the Bills.
Broncos would be awesome. That would be great.
I mean, you can just keep going down the list. The 49ers, honestly, like they traded Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, who knows when he comes back, and they have Ricky Pearsall. But Davante Adams would be a great add there. Those would probably be all my tops ones, because I'm sure he wants to go to a strong contender. But there's so many options for him. I hope he doesn't just say, I need to go where Rodgers goes, because there's really not a lot of options for Rodgers.
Unfortunately, it sounds like that is what he's going to say.
Why?
I don't understand. Yeah.
He has
What
never won you a
is,
Super Bowl. Like, what are you doing?
I'm sure, anybody grew up playing U Sports understands this, but when you have the kid who's really, really good, but he's got the cousin or the little brother that sucks, and it's like you go to the baseball draft. My dad was always a coach, so I was always like helping my dad draft the teams, even though I was one of the players on the team. And I'll be like, well, if we pick Justin, then we got to take Cody with him. That's unfortunate. That's what it feels like right now with Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers. It's like, man, I really want Davante, but we got to take Aaron. Yeah, that's a tough spot. But either way, can't wait to see it all unfold. I think Aaron Rodgers does find a spot this year, so it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But the Chicago Bears, not worried about free agency. They're making their moves early with some trades on the offensive line. The Chicago Bears signed Ben Johnson as their head coach. Love the move. It's my favorite hire of the offseason. And it seems like what they're trying to do is replicate what Ben Johnson had in Detroit by stacking the offensive line. They had 2 open guard positions this offseason, and they go out and they fill them with trade. We see a big trade for Joe Thuney from the Kansas City Chiefs for a 2026 fourth rounder. And then the day before that, the Bears went out and got Jonah Jackson from the Los Angeles Rams. And my guy, Lauren Cox, talked about the first acquisition of the offensive line for the Bears.
The Chicago Bears trade for Jonah Jackson shows just how desperate they were for offensive line help and the necessary evil they have to go through to upgrade the group in front of Caleb Williams. I'm Lauren Cox, host of the Locked On Bears podcast. And the Chicago Bears need a bunch of upgrades on the offensive line. They need to replace all 3 interior starters. And so you're not going to get Pro Bowl players at every spot, but maybe a former Pro Bowl player in Jonah Jackson. Clearly a player who disappointed as a free agent signing for the Los Angeles Rams and is definitely overpaid on his current contract. That's why the Bears were able to get a starter for just a 6th round pick, but they're going to have to pay him as one of the higher paid guards in football and not necessarily expecting that level of play from him. But perhaps the familiarity with Ben Johnson can help him get back closer to the quality of play he had in Detroit, while the Bears have to continue to look elsewhere to fill out the rest of their offensive line. We'll break down this deal and what's next for the Bears O-line on the Locked On Bears podcast.
Well, Lauren's got even more to break down now after the Joe Thuney deal. So I guess in general, I don't like giving up this many assets and this much cap space for guards. Like, that, just not a premium position, and I feel like you can find people. But again, free agency often tells us about the draft, and this is not a very good interior offensive line draft. So it makes sense that rather than hope to get one starter there, the Bears just said, we got to protect Caleb Williams or he's going to bust. We're doing everything. It's like what the Panthers did for Bryce Young last year, paying 2 high-profile guards. Like, we're just like, it doesn't matter what it costs. Caleb Williams is everything. We'll pay what it is.
Yeah, and I think the thing with the Panthers last year, they kind of like paid these guys that we did not think were going to get paid that much, right? It was like guys that were above average, but they should not have been paid that much. But because the Panthers were so desperate and there was the only way to get these free agents in there. With the Joe Thuney, I mean, I think it's a steal to get him for a 2026 fourth rounder. I know you'll have to pay him, but since going to the Chiefs 4 seasons ago, since 2021, he has the 3rd highest PFF pass blocking grade among all offensive linemen, behind only Tristan Wirfs and Laramie Tunsil. 4th place is Trent Williams. So like he is right up there with the elites. He's only allowed 8.5 sacks over his 4 seasons with the Chiefs per Next Gen Stats. That's the fewest of any guard or tackle in the NFL that played at least 2,000 pass block snaps since 2021. So like, I do think he is a great trade for them with how much they allowed sacks last year, how much pressure they allowed. A big part of that was Caleb Williams holding onto the ball too much, but that's why you brought in Ben Johnson, right? To fix any issues with Caleb Williams, but you also had to upgrade the offensive line, do both. That he has the weapons, so it's not like they have to focus too much on upgrading their weapons there. I love this. The only question is Thuney and Jonah Jackson have both played left guard for the majority of their career. So I'm just wondering who they plan to move over to right guard, if that's their plan to have both starting guards.
I think it would be Jonah Jackson.
Yeah.
I think that would. Thuney's the better player, and you want to make sure that you're getting adequate value there. They paid more for him in the trade. That's what I would do. But I mean, we'll see whatever makes most sense. It probably depends on what they want to do with their tackle situation as well. You have Darnell Wright on the right side. He's a younger player. Braxton Jones on the other. It'll be interesting to see it shake out. But I guess my early prediction is Jonah Jackson at right guard. But do want to look at it from the Chiefs side, and losing Joe Thuney, they needed to change some things around, and they're doing it. My guy Chris Clark from Locked On Chiefs talked about that.
The Kansas City Chiefs have made a trade. Joe Thuney is headed to the Chicago Bears for a 2026 fourth-round pick. This is all about creating cap space in 2025. Once the Chiefs franchise tagged Trey Smith, they were about $19 million over the salary cap in 2025. They have to be under it by the start of the new league year next Wednesday, which is a week from today. They are currently about $3 million over after this move, so they still have a couple of moves to make. I would imagine that Chris Jones is going to get a restructure, and that will get them under, and then they can play around with the money that they need with Patrick Mahomes, and that will take care of them for the 2025 cap space. But Joe Thuney is no longer a Kansas City Chief. It's really surprising considering he was the MVP for 2024 for this team, but the team decided they needed to move on. They franchise tagged Trey Smith, and now Joe Thuney will be a Chicago Bear. Much more to come on Locked On Chiefs.
I think the Chiefs needed to make some drastic changes here. I think they need more money on the tackle spots and less on the interior. If they're keeping Trey Smith, they got him on the tag. You got Creed Humphrey, who's going to need an extension in a year. You need to fix the tackle spots. They're more important. They had too much tied up into the interior.
Yeah, they do need to fix the tackle spots, but now they also need to fix their left guard because they don't really have one that could be a starter for next year. So, I mean, it's interesting because they go into the Super Bowl with the biggest worry, like how is their offensive line going to hold up against the Eagles' defensive line? They also did have some injuries along their offensive line, so that was part of it. But you leave that game being like, okay, they really need to shore up their offensive line this year, and then they get rid of they had three really good pieces, right? And Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, and Joe Thuney. They signed Trey Smith, or they franchise tagged him. They have Creed Humphrey under contract. It's just interesting that they actually went away from one of their top three guys instead of adding to it, but I guess they had to with their cap issues.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I always compare it to grocery shopping. Like, you would love, if you have $50, it would be great to spend $50 on steaks, but you just can't do that. Steak is good. It's not like steak is bad. Steak is great, but I just can't do that. I need other things. And at some point, the Chiefs had to reallocate, and it looks like that's what they're trying to do right now. They're going to have to keep hitting in the draft, though, to keep this thing going. That's the key to everything. Do want to mention Zach Bond from the Philadelphia Eagles got a massive extension. He went from a guy who was not a veteran minimum, but he only was making about $3 to $5 million last year, kind of a castaway after his rookie deal, and now is the fourth highest paid linebacker in the NFL. So big deal for Zach Bond to go to the Eagles. But with that, probably means they're going to lose Josh Sweat and they're going to lose Milton Williams, which in the net, I think might be a bigger loss because at the end of the day, I value the pass rush, and they won because of the depth of pass rush that they had. And now you're losing that depth. I think it might be hard to replenish that in 1 year. I'm not high on the Eagles' chances to repeat next year.
Pretty much no teams repeat unless your name is Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady, right? Like, unless you have one of those.
Only the good quarterbacks repeat. The great rosters do not. Yeah.
Yes. So I do think they've done such a good job with replenishing their edge rushers, like just consistently. I think they'll be fine. And I think Zach Bond completely was a guy they needed to keep. I think they're just such a smart team, right? I mean, Zach Bond was an edge rusher with the Saints. Failed. They bring him in first year as an inside linebacker. He's automatically an all pro, right? Played at an elite level at a new position. He might just be on, starting to be great at this position. Who knows what he can become? So I think he deserved to get paid here, and we'll see if I'm surprised that Milton Williams has so much buzz right now. I feel like they can probably keep him for not. I feel like they'll figure out a way to keep him.
Yeah, somebody dumb like the Panthers or something like that will give Milton Williams, $80 million or something, and it'll be one of those things in like 2 years when he's released or given permission to seek a trade, which is the new "we're going to cut you." He'll
offensive or defensive line. Like, I don't know. I don't think he's going to be great if he goes to a team that doesn't have many pieces to help him out.
Yeah, I'm with you. He was great because he was a part of a machine.
Yes.
It's not. Anyways, not trying to hate on you, Milton Williams. You sound like a good guy, but just being honest. Anyways, that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. Free agency is right around the corner, folks. So make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. But I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, with my co-host, the Data Queen, Michelle Majuk. As I tell you every episode, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there.
Bye, y'all.